Good evening, folks.
Hello there.
Hello, hello.
Yeah,
How's everybody doing?
that's pretty nice. I've just noticed something.
Yeah.
Maybe you can tell me what this means. Going on the channel page for the Great Beret,
Yes.
I am subscribed. What's up?
Oh,
But also, I can join.
yeah, Join is their paid version. Join is the one where you pay a couple quid a month.
Oh, it's membership.
And you
This
get
is
a little badge by your name in chat.
So you
And
do it just from there. I didn't know you could do it from there.
why is my chat not working on this window? You might spot people in chat today with badges if they are nice enough to subscribe to us. We've got a couple.
This so feels like we've planned a plug here. Hey, just while I'm here, I've noticed this join button. Can you tell me about
shiny, crazy join button?
Boy, do I want to click it! But can you tell me some great reasons why? I'm not seeing the. Are we definitely live?
We are live. Hey, Jared. Hey, Hyperstar. Hey, Fishy Cake.
Hey, I know Fishy.
Hyperstar, this is my cousin, and he is also my development bro, my development partner.
Development bro is fine. That is the industry term.
That's the industry term, yeah. T Engineer Analyst, your first stream. I don't recognise the name, so welcome to the stream. I don't know if you're part of our Discord server, but I am just going to put a link to my chat.
Defart.
Intriguing.
Defart.
I can't say if I agree with that.
Is he defart? It's like being the shit, but like just definitely not as good. He's like the fart.
He's the absolute fart.
He's a fart, basically.
Basically, Sky makes the game and the other one makes music. Way to fucking reduce all of this, just for it to get a terrible score.
That's spot on.
So there is a Discord link in chat.
Please don't say that out loud. My boss might watch it. I'll be fired from my job as an actual game developer.
Okay, so today we're giving a little bit of an introduction to LD, really. So if anyone isn't too familiar with game jams or Ludum Dare, we'll explain the basic idea, what we do to prepare for it, a bit of our past experience, and today I think one of the main things we're going to hit is theme, because what's coming up pretty soon is the theme of Ludum Dare. There have now been 45 Ludum Dares. We're going up on number 46, as you can see on screen. And every Ludum Dare has its own theme. So everyone who wants to join in makes a game based around that theme. And it's a game jam, so you're very, very limited on the time. The idea of a game jam is just that you make a game incredibly quickly, and Ludum Dare is, depending on the category you go in for, it's either 2 or 3 days. So that's what we'll be doing this weekend. A 72-hour start-to-finish game development based around a currently semi-mysterious theme. We've done 4 so far.
Have we done 4?
We've done 4, yeah. 32, 33, 34, and 45.
We did 32, 33, 34.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yep.
We back-to-back them like that?
Yeah, we did 3 in a row. We've had wildly varying degrees of success, or maybe I should say we've had 1 outlier and 3 decent attempts.
We've had two good hits.
I think we've had 3 good hits and one anomaly that was pretty terrible.
Well, it was very unfinished.
Very, very unfinished. Yeah, there were reasons for it, but yes, that did not do well. I don't even think it got enough plays to get ranked in.
Did it really not?
I don't think so. No.
Brutal.
Because we weren't pushing for anyone to play it because we knew.
No, we weren't.
A completely broken and unfinished game.
We had.
Yeah, but yeah, let's quickly go back to the start and talk about our history with LD. 4 or 5 years ago, I guess, or maybe even like 6 years ago now. Jeez. We took part in Ludum Dare 32. The theme was an unconventional weapon. Oh, nice. Yeah, give us, if you know people doing Ludum Dare, Fishy, give us a link. That would be interesting to check out.
Also, do you want to get some footage up of the previous LDs?
It's actually showing our game.
Yeah.
Sure. I have not.
Because I'm sure there will be some YouTube
in OBS, but I'm sure I can work
it's just on.
Okay.
I can send you some YouTube links and you can click those on. I'll find the stuff. You talk.
Okay. Well, it's easy enough for me to find. Oh no! If you're finding videos, actually, yes. See what you can do. Let me back on.
Well, okay. The first one is very easy because Noxy uploaded it.
Yeah. Send us some links then. But yeah, our first game was called Latvian Milk, to the theme of an unconventional weapon. The idea of our game was that you would make a game. We made a game where your gun changes every 12 seconds. And for a first game that we'd ever made, it's pretty good.
Yeah,
we were very happy with it. Let's put it on here.
Anyway, what was I doing? Yes.
So here we go. This is Latvian Milk. It's a top-down shooter, arena shooter, wave-based shooter. And your gun, as you're about to see, changes every 12 seconds. I'll put sound on for just a moment.
I was just standing in the corner and just...
There you go. Now he has a Uzi.
Rapper.
And if we skip forward a little bit, you might see that he'll end up with a gun that fires eggs. And if you miss with one of those eggs, it hatches an enemy, so you've got to be very careful. And then maybe that'll train you out for another gun in a moment. Now he's got a favourite gun of ours, the laser beam.
It's the best.
It's good.
There are two brilliant guns in this game. Actually, the egg gun's pretty cool too. I can screen share the other one, by the way.
Sure, we can do that.
Because I've literally got it on my screen right now.
So that was Ludum Dare 32. And yeah, that game got rated pretty highly. We were very happy with the finished product there. And the clown's still broken in buried things. The clowns are never broken in buried things, fishy. They just take ages to come onto screen because they're very slow. But they do work. So yeah.
Can we just finish the other one? Or should we?
We'll go through them quickly one at a time, but we'll get to that. So yeah, what went well about Latvian Milk? Why did that game do as well as it did?
Okay, yeah, I can definitely break this one down pretty easily. It wasn't unique. It wasn't a unique game development idea. It was a very tried and tested existing game model, and it was also so when we were working on it. So I work as a game developer. That's my job. But back then, none of us had much experience. I had maybe a bit more than you guys, but for the most part, we're all pretty fresh to it. I'd done a bit more Game Maker than everybody else, but we were working in Unity, which was a brand new engine for all of us at the time. And me and Sky weren't coding. We were basically art and design support. It was
you were all of the music as well, I think, right?
I was all of the music, and actually I was all the sound design as well.
Yeah.
Which tends to always be the thing. I think it's just because I don't get to do that in my real job. And it's really fun. And like we're both musicians, so it's fun to flex sometimes.
And I did most of the art. You did some of the art as well.
Yeah. But for most of the whenever my default suggestion, if you're going to make a new game, is to rip off an existing game and rip off a very tiny existing game. And one of the models that's quite fun because you can put your own spin on it, that I do find very easy to replicate, is a top-down shooter. And so when we were talking about what we wanted to do, I pitched that we do a top-down shooter. And then and conveniently the theme worked out very well. But it was a simple idea. It was a wave-based top-down shooter. We've played hundreds of Flash games like this before. We knew the design space. We didn't have to be very innovative. And to be honest, we weren't very innovative. And also, we leaned on a lot of existing design principles. There's a popular game design talk called The Art of Screen Shake that was huge a few years ago and is still really relevant now, even though the genre is not as crowded. And we ripped off every single principle of that. It's a talk by one of the guys of Vlambeer, and the other guy from Vlambeer retweeted our game, being like, "This feels like a Vlambeer game." Yeah, we know. Not without a little trying on our end. So that was definitely one of the reasons it was very successful. It wasn't overscoped, and it was basically, we just spent a lot of time getting the juiciness down. The music is good, the sound design is punchy, the weapons are big and obnoxious, the characters small and cute. It's very straightforward. We spent a lot of time making the explosions feel good. It wasn't very innovative, but it also played to LD's strengths, where it looked more polished than perhaps your normal LD game was, which, not to spoil what's ahead, but it's very different from the most recent game we've done, which actually is very polished by LD standards. And I think we faked it a lot more with Latvian Milk. Even though it is a well-made game, and to be honest, especially seeing as our friend Will was helming that, and he had no experience, it's kind of insane that it ever got made. Yeah, frankly.
That game is...
It's a really impressive first project for some.
We had a third teammate for that who was on code, one of my high school friends. the rate at which he essentially learned to use the engine that we were using, because that was a first for all of us, to actually get that game coded, ridiculous.
Yeah.
That was 3 days to do what you saw on that screen from someone who never used the engine before.
Who would like literally
Crazy.
like I think he like maybe like read a programming book, like that was it.
Yeah, I think he'd done some C# before, but he'd never used Unity.
No, definitely not. So that was but also it seemed more polished because it was really low scope. It was a model in which we didn't have to think about what made it feel good. Like a lot of the time when you're trying to be inventive, you have the pearl of a brilliant, unique idea, but you cannot play test it. You can't know for sure if what you've thought of is good and fun or if it's just interesting. Whereas with a top-down shooter, it's all the work's been done for you. It's like if you made Pac-Man, you don't have to. It's already good. It's a model that works. You don't have to.
And getting the difficulty correct is easy enough as well, because with the top-down shooter, it really is as simple as you throw more enemies into the arena.
Yeah, and it's wave-based, so ultimately, eventually, it balances itself out.
Right.
Eventually, it does get too hard.
Yeah, and it's nice as well. It's a game like that gives you an excuse to not even have to balance it so much, right? You just say, hey, see how many waves you can get done. Okay, yeah, Captain has donated $1. Thank you very much, Captain.
It is Captain Cocaine.
He also asks...
The Captain of Cocaine.
Yes, what's this as well? There's what's this?
I like that he doesn't know what it is, but he's like, what's this? I'll give it $1. What's this? I ain't sure about this. It can have $1. What's this? This is our stream discussing the upcoming game jam, Ludum Dare 46, which we'll be doing this weekend and talking about how we're going to approach it. We don't know what we're making yet because the theme doesn't get announced, but we're going to prep you guys for what's going to be happening.
But the general idea is we're making a game in 3 days that's happening this weekend.
And almost all 3 of these days will be streamed, apart from...
Yeah, I plan on probably streaming around 50 hours out of that weekend. It's going to be a lot of...
So the possible themes are sort of out now, Fishy, but they've not been... Well, they're literally all out, but we don't know which ones they're going to be. The first 45 are out. That gets narrowed down to 20. That gets narrowed down to 1. We've seen the 45, so we do know it will be one of those. We don't know which one yet.
There's kind of an amusing thing in here in that Deja Vu is in all 3 lists as well. But I guess that only counts once, but someone's had a laugh there. Hey Ginger. Hey, thank you, Anna. What would you like the theme to be? We're going to come back to that shortly. We're going to finish going through the games that we did for the previous LDs, but one of the big things I think we're going to hit today is to do with themes, so we will get back to that.
Do you want to screen share my screen and I can show off the next game?
Sure. Give me a moment. On the fly OBS editing here. Hang on.
Alright, I will share this screen. It's not maximized.
Oh wait, that actually
we never did.
kind of work. Yeah, let me just literally make that bigger. 1 second. It's this.
Have you just put it in my little face?
There you go. So, it's a very small game, which is why the window looks so small. But this was game number 2. This is... why do you have this, by the way?
I just downloaded it from itch.net.
Oh, fair enough. So this is the Thrich Remains. This is almost the extent of the entire game. You'll notice the menu moves around a bit while you walk.
We can examine the modules. There's no modules here, actually.
Yeah, we've not jumped to her. So this is the map. You click a square, and your remaining distance that you can travel reduces, which you can see by the green and the yellow diamond. When you come to a galaxy, you may find just a random piece of ship floating around, and you can attach it to your ship if you get lucky and find one. There you go. Okay. So we're going to attach that to our ship, based on where the doors are. So this module only has a door on the right-hand side.
We got found one.
We can expand our ship, and we found a bioreactor-y type thing.
We did. It has got sound. I can turn the sound on, but I don't know if you guys will be able to hear it.
Yeah, that works. I completely forgot
These
what
make noises off.
even sounded like.
Well, this is the first time we worked with a collaborator we didn't know, right? This was a different musician.
Yeah. It's decent music.
Yeah, it was alright. I actually still follow this guy in SoundCloud.
So this was our second game. This was a disaster. This game got almost nowhere, and the reason really was that I was learning to use GameMaker over this weekend. This was kind of my crash course. So we got very, very little done. But it was valuable. I basically learned everything I know about GameMaker in that 3 days. You got unlucky with the doors there, bud. So
That's good.
yeah, you can see your fuel is reducing. That diamond of places you can move is getting smaller and smaller.
Well, we're not getting very lucky here. Even by the Threat Remain standards, this is quite a poor showing. Gosh, it's very empty system today.
I think one of the biggest things we learned from this game is just it's so easy to overscope in LD. Your idea is always too big. I think almost without exception, your idea is just always too big. You always end up cutting something from the final product. And in this particular occasion, we ended up cutting all of the game because the game was too big.
All of the combat, all of the win condition,
the fun, the content,
the joy.
It sort of got dropped so that we could make the character walk around and stick some rooms together. If you can stick your camera back on, that would be swell.
You can.
Probably. There it goes. Perfect. All right. So that was our second LD. That game was awful. The third LD was Hyper Democracy, which is more of a narrative game, and
that one was also it was mostly you.
Kind of.
I wasn't really on that much.
You personally weren't on that much. You spent about a day on that because you were quite busy, so you weren't part of the full development team. But what was really interesting about Hyper Democracy, and to quickly give the premise, you live in a town where, in order to be like the ultimate democratic society, everyone votes on all like legal bills that may or may not be passed. So people suggest bills to like go through Parliament, and everyone in the town has a computer at home and they vote yes or no on those bills, whether they want them to go through or not. And that website that you vote on bills also has a live chat room that you can talk to everyone else about the bills as they're going through. So all of the game is about you being logged into this website, seeing people talking and voting on themes. And there was a ton of dialogue in that game because the way that the development team worked with that game is that it was rolling constantly. I developed the whole thing basically in a public chat room on TeamSpeak, and people from the community would just drop in and be like, hey, can I what's going on in here? And when I'd explain it and say, I'll take any help I can get, people would just offer up bits of art. We've got like 3 different pieces of music in there from 3 different people.
That was there was like an actual recorded violin piece.
Yeah, and a recorded banjo piece. It's sick. The banjo piece is so good in that game.
I don't remember which. I just remember that there was some like people actually recorded into their own mics, which is
very
pretty fucking cool.
Yeah, someone just went out on the balcony with a violin and just recorded a violin piece for me.
That's so sick.
Yeah,
that's so lovely.
It was fantastic. Art from 3 or 4 different people and writing from 3 or 4 different people. So that was a really interesting experience, having to wrangle probably like 12 people over the course of 3 days who were just giving me bits and having to like make something out of it. That was really interesting. And that game also did pretty well in terms of lessons to learn from it. Again, it was overscoped. But also like making sure you're sticking to your strengths.
Oh, because I actually remember the performance on that one.
It did well in a couple categories. Let's see if we can actually find it here.
I can get that and play that on screen, actually.
If you can grab it, yeah. The last time I tried to download it from Itch.io, it seemed kind of broken. Don't know if that was the computer though.
Yeah, look.
See what it looks like to you. See if it works.
Sure.
The ratings for it, let's see. So this is Ludum Dare 34 now. Its best one was Humour at 31. Audio,
wow, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Audio, top 15.
Audio 33, which I think is fair. It works.
You want to
fantastic? Yeah, give it the old screeny sharing. Your face is going to get
You'll
very big
notice
here.
some consistent themes between all 4 of these games is that we use the same character art style. Oh, I did the splash.
You did.
I drew this.
I like this. You can see the one dissenting opinion thought bubble down at the bottom there. This represents up and down votes. And this is the banjo piece, although it's actually quite hard to hear through your mic.
Yeah, it's nice. Oh, do you want me to turn it up?
If you can.
Not much, to be fair. There you go. Look at even just like the movement tech that was broken in the last one. I don't know if you saw me gliding around, but you can't do that in this, and there's footstep sounds. And the bounce is nicer.
So this is the banjo piece. If you go and access the computer,
he's a zoom.
I forgot that happened. Yeah.
What's the
E probably?
You'd think so, wouldn't you?
Oh,
it is.
okay. And here is the piece that you wrote.
I wrote this. I hadn't heard this yet. Wait, I mean, I forgot about this. Motion being the direction of a commercial dog. Yeah. Motion failed. Continue.
And you can see this live chat happening under the votes the whole time, so you can read what everyone else is saying, and all the names in there are references to the people who helped out making the game as well. So yeah, this is the third one, and of course the final game that we made for LD is Buried Things. Which,
yeah, so the law requires you to it all the time. I can remember the premise of this one. It's good actually.
There we go. Feel free to put yourself back on.
Sure.
And Buried Things, of course, we streamed onto this channel 6 months ago. The full 72 hours of dev, or near enough, and that was a ton of fun as well. But that we correctly scoped.
Playing that one, shall we have a look? In case people aren't familiar.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you guys can play this one yourself if you want. This is in the Discord server announcements.
Weirdly, harder to find than...
Oh, there is a link to one clip in the comments of that game. If you want to look in the comments.
Are we in best Ludum Dare 45 games list?
The clouds caused chaos. Buried Things, yeah, it's a game digging up treasure from the desert, and it was cool because we got art submissions from chat and they got credited in the game as well, which is something we might...
easily the best LD game we made.
Yes, it's our most successful one. Even though the ratings don't really reflect that, we definitely think it's our most successful LD game.
Yeah, did it actually end up scoring worse than Latvian Milk?
Yeah.
Which is weird to me. Well, it's not weird to me, actually. Understanding how Ludum Dare works, understanding that everyone throws 5 minutes at a game. It's just, it is... I personally am still so much more impressed with what we did.
But yeah, it was the most correctly scoped game. We barely cut anything from that. We cut some stuff because you always do, but the vision of that game was in the product. And I remember we talked afterwards about the fact that we thought it was kind of amusing that this is our least favourite idea for a Ludum Dare game that we've ever worked on. And we think that may have something to do with the fact that we completed it. Because we weren't that invested in the idea. We didn't really like the idea of Buried Things particularly, which meant that we weren't attached to things when we needed to drop them for scoping's sake. And we didn't think it was a particularly interesting idea, which means it wasn't overscoped in the first place. It was a fairly simple thing to work on. So that was kind of interesting. It's probably our least favourite idea of the four, and therefore made the best game, and I think there is some relation there.
We didn't run away with ourselves in terms of thinking how to manipulate the mechanics or anything like that. Because the mechanics were straightforward. They weren't the drive. The drive after a while was, this is the whole game mechanically that we'd ever planned on, and we don't find the mechanic interesting enough to try and work out the smart stuff to do with it. So let's just make content around this mechanic. Right. And we end up getting a really... And beyond just like having a game where you could do a lot of things, we have an opening cutscene. We have an animated splash screen. We have...
a win condition.
A win that you can win. And it's rewarded in a small way. Maybe the only thing we would have done would have been like putting the closing cutscene, but games that like LD games do not have cutscenes.
No.
And fair enough, like a cutscene isn't the most exciting thing in a video game by any stretch, but it is a huge indicator of polish if you can get something like that in. Not that every game needs it, but if you have one, it's an indication of polish.
We had good conveyance in that game as well, which is something you usually don't have time to even think about. But there's a very clear goal in the game, which is suggested to you not through any kind of dialogue, but just the way the game presents itself. When you look in the museum, you've got these 12 slots that are yet to be filled, but they're silhouetted. They maybe suggest the kind of thing that they look like. They all have a hint as to where they might be and a clue to how you get them.
Shall I show some of it off again? I can't find a video of it, but I can download it.
Sure.
Do a final one.
So yeah, this is the one that we liked the most, and definitely the lesson we're taking away from this is scope. This is a good sized game, and also the readiness with which we dropped ideas that we didn't think were going to be too big. That we thought would be too big.
Even just downloading it, right? I've just downloaded the other 2 games at least.
Yeah.
And this is the only one that has an icon for the game.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, of course, and it's the only one that doesn't need to install. Like it's just better. Also, this does come with time though. Like you got better at programming. I got probably more efficient with my artwork, and we definitely, like, design-wise, it's not just that this game happened to like hit a. We didn't get lucky with it. I do think we were acting off lessons learned, both in technically and design wise, and hopefully we can continue that.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Let me share my screen for a sec because I think it's going to kick off almost immediately. Turn on screen share.
We've got a giant face.
And let me just. Are we in a good spot?
Go for it, yep.
Cool. Let me just. I have to move the window over.
Can you turn it down a bit?
Yeah. Just look at these prompts and everything. Look at the difference in the quality.
Also, if you don't immediately click on one of these boxes, the game will prompt you to left click as well.
Yep.
Or it may only be on the first box that it does that.
It is only on. Well, it's once you've clicked, you're supposed to know.
Right. We've got a little light that shows you who's talking.
Animated text.
Yeah.
Animation on this guy here. Watch as he drops his sacred treasure map. Very important. And even we haven't even begun the game.
What was that? Sorry, mate?
So, and we haven't even begun the game. Like we've only just started the game.
Now, this is probably the most on-theme game as well, which is something we haven't mentioned yet. Like I said earlier, theme is a big thing in LD. At the start of the 72 hours, you find out a theme that you're supposed to base your game on. And we kind of didn't really have enough time to make any of our previous games about the theme that it was meant to be about. So, like, unconventional weapon was in the first one, kind of worked, your weapon changes, but all of the weapon types that it changes to are all fairly straightforward, with maybe one exception. We wanted way wackier, weirder weapons in that game that we just never got around to making. The second one, You Are the Enemy, our game has no indication of that. Hybrid Democracy is partially about the theme growing, and very little of that got into the game.
Yeah.
This one, even though the theme itself I don't think is good, we clearly have a game where you start with nothing and you find more things. And Fishy, there is a cloud for you.
Yeah. So I actually haven't played this game since we made it, and it's really good. There's so many things that just are above and beyond here. The fact that one of the puzzles has to do with the reflections in the sand here.
The fact that the sand reflects is so...
The fact that the sand reflects at all, but the fact that we built it into a mechanical part of this game, that you just, okay, I'm just going to leave here, and then what's this at the top of my screen? It's just smart. We did a really good job. I'm still really proud of this one.
I'm hoping we can do something that I'm as proud of this LD as this game, because this feels like a peak.
Yeah, this was particularly good. It doesn't feel like this is a 3D game.
No, not at all. Which is what you want to make. You want to make a game that didn't feel like it was done in 3 days.
And you see all the people here that create stuff. Anyway, that's that.
Alright. Come back to us, Nero.
I shall. I've missed you.
Sorry, let me go and silence my WhatsApp. So everyone isn't running to there. So, yeah, that's all 4 of our games. And that's the one that I think we want to replicate more closely than the others. The success of that game, we're really happy with it. The polish is great. We need to scope
if
similarly.
we can get anything that's scoped well enough that we can polish it to that degree, I'll be very impressed. If at any point we're like saying something along the lines of we should put in a cutscene or we should put in a different mode, like something that's just like to the point where there's no way you should feel like you have time for that.
Yeah.
Because I would never scope around something like that, right? You would never say, okay, what we need is... My rules on what you need always are win condition. I think that a way of getting like knowing that you've done a good job is the game works and you have with like a win condition and a main mechanic and you've got credits and sound.
Yeah.
Because if you've got that, then that's sort of proof that you had to do everything else on the way there.
Right.
But like things like a cutscene is like another good example of a way of being like, it's obvious that in order to get here you've had to make a lot. But normally I would never scope around that, so getting it is always impressive. And if we can do anything where we're getting to that point again, that's obviously going to be a sign of personal success.
This is going to be interesting in that we're using Unity though, so I'm curious as to how workflow will be different, and how much faster it'll feel polished. Because I think you've now got a lot of experience making Unity things feel polished quickly.
There's that. Well, it's gonna be a weird one. Again, if we're working on Unity here for this game, and I think that it might be the case. Well, you tell me actually, because you're going to be the programming lead on this project. It might be the case that a game naturally lends itself towards Game Maker, in which case you say, well, let's take the reins of Game Maker, or it might be that this LD46 is exclusively being used as a learning and a stepping stone, in which case we stick with Unity regardless, because it's going to be important to it's valuable to use this time as a means to also skill up in Unity.
It's only 3 days. I don't think if we did Game Maker in this LD that's particularly a lost cause in terms of Unity learning. If there was a game that I think was particularly good in Game Maker and not in Unity, then maybe we would do it in that. But I think that's quite specific kinds of game. So it depends what our idea is.
Yeah, it's going to be games that feel a lot like the games we've already made. If we want to make something that feels like that, and we know that workflow very well, then Unity's going to be
So I'd say it's like
slowest.
I'd say it's like 90-10 that we use Unity for this.
Yeah, and I'm also, again, in terms of me and what I do in my life, in my world, I am a Unity developer, and I've made a lot of games in Unity now, but also in Game Maker, for the most part, you don't need assistance in Game Maker. Sometimes you'll be like, what's the problem here? And it'll be a coding thing where we'll just look at lines together, but it's not like I'm helping you with syntax or anything. Whereas here, it's going to be very easy for you to lean on me for syntax and stuff. But in terms of structure, or just your personal confidence jumping in, or again, one of the other things is when you hit a new engine, you often scope differently because you're very aware of the scope for Game Maker now. Right. You know what comes easiest. You know what fundamentally we just don't hit. We don't touch that. Whereas Unity, you've got a lot more options on what you can do. And that could either become something that's very beneficial or a bit of a hindrance because we try and lean on those options mechanically or something.
Right. Yeah. It's a bit more of an unknown in terms of what we can scope for.
Hugely.
But I think the main thing we wanted to talk about today was really about theme and what it is and what makes it good. And I think it's probably time we got into that a little bit. So I flashed it up a couple times, but here are the shortlisted themes. There are 45 of them. Within the next day or two, everyone will be voting on these, and the top 20 will be shortlisted again, and then a vote will be taken on those, and then finally, at the beginning of the 72 hours, which is Friday evening, Saturday morning, depending on your time zone, we'll be finding out what the theme we're working towards is. So these are the shortlisted themes, and they're the ones that we've voted for as well. Fishy is appalled that we voted down Grow a Tree.
Well, there's a reason for that.
There is a reason for it.
We'll explain why. I really just think about Grow Up or Home. When you think of Unity games. You'd be amazed how many of the games probably you've even played in the last 5 years are Unity games.
That's probably specifically a Grow a Tree thing.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Just because I grow up and Grow Home.
Yeah.
Just some of my favourites. Grow Home is one of my favourites.
Which one? Yeah, Grow Home is the first one, right?
Grow Home is the first one. Grow Up is ambitious and interesting, but I do think it's just...
Grow Up's a bit messy to me.
It's messy.
I don't think the progression of the game works anywhere near as well.
Like a joke.
Grow Home, is perfectly funnels the progression.
Yeah.
The things that you can do in that game just slowly widen.
Yeah, Grow Up is more of a technical showcase than it is a game design showcase.
Yeah.
Grow Home is a better video game.
I believe, I would say that's the case. But they're very cool games, and yes, they certainly do come to mind when you think grow a tree.
As far as games about growing trees go, that you can't compete with. They're too good. But yeah, go on. Then you lead the charge on why.
Are we gonna just go through this list top to bottom?
Well, just quickly. We can do. And we'll explain. Okay, here's my pitch for what we do now. Let's explain what we think are fundamentally bad ideas for themes, because there's a couple of reasons that there's not just we haven't voted all these themes down for the same reason. We've got different reasons for having voted some of these down. And then also, I think after that, it might be worth going through the themes that we voted up and talking about either why we think they're promising themes or ideas we've had that made us vote those things up.
Okay, what do you think makes a theme good then?
Okay, I think it's easier to point out what makes a theme bad.
Sure.
Than it is what makes a theme good. So one of the first thing that makes a theme bad that we both agree on is a theme that we've seen a lot too much of. I think that's like a very easy one straight away. There are themes that we have probably taken a distaste to because they are suggested very commonly or they've been done before, or like throughout the course of Ludum Dare. And then ultimately they are themes that we just go, we don't need to see that one again. Right. That's an easy throwaway.
Are there any examples of that in this list?
4 Elements.
Yeah.
Shelter has actually been one.
I think You Are the Dungeon might have been one.
Yeah, I think You Are the Dungeon might have been one. There's a kind of like memeticism to some of these, where like some of these ideas are so overwrought.
Yeah, you see them all the time in the theme suggestion stage of Ludum Dare. A famous one is Floating Islands, although that hasn't made it into these 3 lists. No,
and like the idea that you play as the villain, like it's not just a Ludum Dare staple, it's a game jam staple of like this kind of, what if you play as the blank? And actually that format of you are the blank is something that you and I have a great distaste for. Because it's anything that sounds smart when you say it for the first time, but if you had to think about it, is either very derivative or very like mechanically uninteresting. And that happens very often when you're trying to just like spitball. You can come up with a like, okay, well, you play as the game mechanic. And it's like, okay, fine. It sounds like, oh, maybe that's interesting, but just think about what you've said for 2 seconds. It's not an interesting idea. It's not an idea. You haven't had a good thought.
and for even the worst themes you could possibly think of, there's always 1 or 2 things you could probably do with it because you can do anything. But of course, the fact that I can think of an idea for this doesn't make it a good theme because 3,000 people participate in Ludum Dare, and that's something to think about.
Right, exactly. So so a lot of these themes also aren't necessarily just about could we have a good idea for it. A lot of the time it's if all the ideas we're having are very derivative or very subversive, then you sort of know you're not onto a great theme. Like if all the like a good example is like growth is one that you see a lot. I think it's actually a theme twice. And it's definitely been suggested this time. So,
well, there's a Evolve here, which is very similar.
But one of the things with growth is that most people think of farming games.
Yeah.
Like that's the very derivative idea you had. It's growing plants. It's growing crops. That's the first thing that comes to my head. Or if I'm trying not to make a game like that, then I'm having to think very subversively, and I feel like I'm going off theme. So it's going to be 3,000 games that are about growing plants, and that's going to be you're not going to stand out in that space. It's not going to be fun to play in that space for a very long time. You've not got much opportunity to show off your own style or your own creative flair. Or it's going to be a lot of games where growth is just tangentially a part of it, at which point you've not really like had fun with the limitations of the game jam. Like the game jam is supposed to inspire you to think in a specific way. Right. But there's a kind of like weird like Goldilocks zone of like specificity and like vagueness.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also something that specificity and vagueness applying to different things as well. I've seen themes that are like really vague, simultaneously really vague on the premise or the setting, for example, of a game, and yet simultaneously very specific about the genre of the game that you're going to have to make.
Right.
And that, I think, is maybe one of the worst themes that you can possibly come up with, because genre is something I think should generally be fairly open.
Something like
shouldn't be limited to one genre, certainly.
Yeah, something like I don't know, the faster you go, the more damage you take, and it's like, okay, you could set that anywhere. The game could be about anything, but they're all going to fundamentally roll on like one mechanic, and they're all going to be games about going fast, and they're all going to be games in which you're managing a life bar. And this is that you've got too many limitations here for you to like. They've almost done the bit that's fun for you, which is here's my creative spin on an idea. Like they've done and once that's taken away from you, what you're really doing is just trying to make like the cleanest or prettiest or most polished version of the same game everyone else is making, and that is a very unfun way to do a game jam, especially seeing as people's strengths are in different places.
Should we go through why we've upvoted the ones that we've upvoted?
Yeah, I will say also some of the ones we've upvoted probably more than we actually cared for.
Yes.
To be fair, we wanted to try and get about 20 upvoted so that because there's going to be 20 shortlists at the end.
So
there's a few of these that I think are worse than more of these.
But first of all, yeah, Garden. Did we have an actual idea for Garden?
I know Garden was one of those that we fundamentally decided wasn't bad enough to downvote.
Yeah, Garden and Decay, actually, we were both very neutral on.
I think in a normal LD, and also the other thing is this was the first batch. We did these in 3 batches, and the first batch, as you can see, we liked much less. And to have only voted up like 2 or 3 of those would have felt like we were not participating. So we did vote up a couple of those. I would now, given the option, I'd probably take out Garden and Decay.
Yeah, I'm maybe with you on that.
I do think the first batch still inspires me less than the next 2.
Turn up violent genre, non-violent. We thought would be fun to actually do that within the game itself. So we're not making a design twist on a violent genre. What we're actually doing is literally making a game with violence in it, but you play as a character who's trying to stop all that violence happening around him. So you're trying to get in the way of fights happening, trying to divert things that would otherwise be violent, and maybe that's a win or lose condition. If violence happens, game over. You've got to start again. Yeah.
We also had an idea that that we thought was interesting, which was gun tennis. Which is something we could maybe do, a game in which you are playing a non-violent thing, but there's a mechanically violent thing happening, and that automatically feeds into something that the game has designed itself at that stage.
So a game where you've got a gun and firing bullets at things can help you do certain stuff. For example, kind of playing a game of Pong where you might need to ricochet the ball by firing bullets at it. But if one of your stray bullets accidentally kills someone, you're screwed because you've caused violence, and that's against the rules.
Yeah, and maybe as even now I'm just running with ideas. So it's every point you get, your bullet gets an additional ricochet, so it gets harder and harder. And initially it's quite easy to get your first point. You just have to play Pong, but after a while you've got to make sure that as your bullet's bouncing around, it doesn't hit the opponent as well.
Looking at the things we've downvoted in this list, one thing that makes a theme bad that I don't think we mentioned, unless I'm just forgetting now, is that some themes really imply massive scope that you can't really achieve.
Right. These are an ancient language.
I'm talking about an ancient language, which we quite like as an idea for a game.
Yeah, I'd love to make a game based around an ancient language. That sounds really interesting.
But it's just not an LD theme.
No.
Because one thing that I'm very aware of is that LD is great for people who are getting into game design. Lots of kids join in LD, and it needs to be accessible to anyone who's doing it. This is not a game jam for professionals. Professionals can join in if they want, but this is anyone can take part. And more realistically as well, you've got 3 days to make a game. So if your theme is an ancient language or some ridiculous things I've seen like dimension fluidity,
which is a bad theme for a whole host of reasons,
or RPG with a twist. How long do you think it takes to make an RPG?
If anyone implies that something should be multiplayer in any fashion, it's you've just cut so many people out.
Butterfly effect is one as well that you see frequently. Oh, in fact, I didn't even realise it's right under ancient language there. Anything to do with chaos theory. People seem to like chaos theory.
Implies too much stuff.
Yeah,
or when people say a number of something 100 things or whatever, 100, but one is broken, and it's that's someone's gonna make 100 things. Not everyone's got time to do that. And also, if you do, you might not have enough time to make any of them interesting.
So yeah, themes that just
great question, Fishy. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no idea. I can give you tons of examples of themes we've seen this week that are completely meaningless.
People love saying big words to try and sound smart.
I've saved some that I'll go through just for shit.
Superliminal sublimity. And it's come on, fuck off. It's not, come on, just say something like cats. I'll make a game about cats, that sounds fun. It's also there's a very obvious, and I don't know if this is just me being mean to people, but I'm allowed to do that, it's not my stream. But it's very obvious to me that the more complex the theme suggestion is in terms of its vocabulary, the less intelligent the person who suggested it is. We all know the word. We're just smart enough not to use those words.
Okay, I found what I think may be the creme de la creme of nonsense, lofty themes, which is time is only finite when you move.
What does it mean?
Let's just not try and break that one down.
Not time moves when you move, not someone's seen Super Hot and gone, well, I can't say that, but can I make it sound wankier? And simultaneously, you've achieved it. And also, come up with a much worse and nonsensical idea. It's bad, isn't it?
Dreadful, absolutely dreadful. 1 minute to prepare, we like.
Yeah, so one of the ideas that we were throwing around for 1 minute to prepare was the idea that rather than having a minute, like 60 seconds in order to set something up, which is the default response, it's that the minute isn't a real-time minute. So you have 60 second units, and you have to tell people, like, you're working at a billion trillion frames per second. So you can designate 6 units for this guy to go and board up this window, 12 units for this guy to go and fetch this and then come back or whatever. Whatever the game ends up being, the idea of like managing something could be one way to reinterpret that.
So yeah, you're planning the next minute of time.
Yes.
You have to prepare 1 minute. Hey, Rubik's. And yes, there have been games, quite a few games actually, based around this sort of general idea.
I think 60 seconds might have come out of a game jam.
Yeah, I suspect it was actually. Because this is also a fairly common jam sort of idea, is like you only have 20 seconds. I know was one, or you only have 5 seconds was one, or 10. Yeah, 10 Second Ninja came out of a game jam. Shimmy came out of maybe the same game jam. They're both games where they originally were made for jams where you only have 10 seconds. So the short time limit in the game idea is a frequent jam thing.
Yeah.
Fragile. Oh, well, actually, one of the things that we do like about 1 minute to prepare as well is that there is still a ton of stuff you can do with that. You can be preparing anything.
Yeah. It does.
That
Even if we all made the same game in which you've got a 60-second time window and then something happens, right, we're all probably making different games.
Right. But it's still specific enough that it's a really nice launch point. It's not just a theme that I've seen, like your actions affect the game, which is every single game that's ever been made. It narrows things down enough that you can start immediately kind of brewing ideas in your head of, well, what kind of things would you prepare in 1 minute? Here's some suggestions. Here's some ideas.
Yeah.
But yeah, Fragile.
Also, just a heads up to everybody here. These will all get narrowed down to 20, and when they get narrowed down to 20 on stream day, we'll do what we did / you did last time, which is we will come up with an idea for each one. We might not come up with 20 ideas. It's more likely that we'll come up with like 6 ideas and see that they apply to 3 each, or something like that. But I am aware that was 18. There will be a point at which every idea is roughly covered, so that we're not just getting one that we don't like and being like, well, shit, actually, we didn't. This was sort of a vague idea. We want to go in swinging-ish.
When you've only got 3 days to make a game, you want as little of that time dedicated to idea generation as possible. So yeah, we want to, as soon as that 72-hour hits and we get the theme, we want to go, oh, okay, we're making the taxi driver game.
Also, I saw a comment up there by Aperture Online saying, I love automation, but everyone's just going to make factorial times. Yeah. Exactly. It's the reason that we didn't. You're going to get 3,000 very similar games.
Yeah, exactly what I've downloaded it. Not only that, but this is a particularly bad culprit because this is both a game where everyone will make the same thing and a game that is way overscoped. Yeah, making a game about automation in 3 days.
It's really tough.
Yeah, no way. So it's not a good theme at all on 2 counts. What were we saying for Fragile? Because we had a cool thing for this, didn't we?
So the idea for Fragile, the first one I remember throwing out, was the idea of rather than being about breaking something or stopping something from breaking, it's about fixing broken things. So the idea of like you're a kintsugi guy who is like fixing broken vases, plates, smashed whatever, in a kind of like a Zen piecing together what's broken, like almost like a 3D jigsaw puzzle. Maybe mechanically a little more interesting than just putting them in the right place, don't know. But the idea of slowly, about putting something back together, I think will be subversive, interesting, and on theme, and a bit more interesting to me than just breaking something.
Yeah. Because a ton of games are going to be about just like protecting something, like escorts essentially. This thing is going to get broken by enemies unless you.
There will be 2 major games that I expect to see come out of Fragile. A game where you are carrying something or guarding something that shouldn't be broken, and a game where the world itself breaks apart.
Yeah,
so
destructible.
you fall away, you can smash stuff. and that will be a problem. There'll be a lot of games about breaking things, and that probably being a negative, because that's kind of the implication of fragile as a word. But I think the idea of putting something back together that's fragile is unlikely to get hit very often.
And that's pretty much everything we liked in round one.
Do you want to talk about any of these that you particularly hated? See, a couple of these, again, I remember saying a couple of these aren't necessarily bad. Like, I remember saying, like, when, you are the princess waiting to be rescued. Like, like initially you might kind of like roll your eyes at it and go, that's not that interesting. But I do think as a setup for like a writing prompt or something, it's not a bad idea. It's kind of funny. It's like it's a story that you know it's a story that you know because it's the princess rescue story, which we all know,
Right.
done from a different angle, so you can like play with that. But I do think mechanically it doesn't invite an interesting idea, or it invites too much of a like you just whatever idea.
It might be an interesting premise for one game or 5 games, just not 3,000 games.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally great.
Yeah.
Maybe. But and similarly, like inconvenient superpowers over on theme round 3, I think is maybe a good writing prompt. Like some of these are like, okay, I can write something here that I haven't thought about it from this angle. Like, how can it be interesting to be the princess in the Princess Rescue story? How can it be interesting for your superpower to hinder you?
Right.
But I don't think making a video game about that is necessarily going to be interesting.
So
or
3,000 video games.
You'll get very similar games. So
I can't remember.
So yeah, there's a couple of these that I don't hate. I just think like, for whatever reason,
Yeah, they just don't work as an LD thing.
they just don't work for Ludum Dare.
I can't remember if it said hi to your Aquarius. Hi, Aquarius.
Okay.
So, theme round 2. Sabotage. We just generally like the sort of... what's the word I'm looking for? Just the settings of that, I guess, being someone who is being sneaky and trying to doing espionage, trying to break something secretly. Did we have any specific ideas for sabotage?
I can't remember. I don't think we did, but I remember we mentioned some games that were like vaguely sabotaging. We like them all. Like I remember me and you used to play a lot of Mafia together.
Yeah.
And the idea of like having to sneakily ruin something whilst not proving that you're ruining something is an interesting idea. We both like it. We don't have a game. If it makes it to the top 20, we will think of one.
Oh, I do remember we mentioned a game I did that's probably too big in scope, where you're like running a factory line in World War II trying to make dud and kills or something like that. But
that's right.
The idea of that game would probably end up being an automation game where you're trying to make bullets that pass initial inspection, quality check inspection, but fail on the battlefield. So it's a balance of making it sort of faulty but not faulty enough. But that sounds like a very complicated game mechanic, and it's probably not an LD scope game.
Evolve is literally just sport. Evolve is another one that you see a lot of, and I don't think it's very interesting.
Nope.
And it does sort of off towards a lot of games that already exist. The other thing is, if there's a theme that there's a lot of games that already do it and do it well.
You know what? That's a good.
That they've taken up the design space. Then it's just like, well, okay.
Especially
there's some
specific
mechanics that are probably forever going to be interesting, like jumping.
Yeah.
Like, can you do jumping different? Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Like, it's a mechanic we see a lot, and there's thousands of ways to do it. Evolve is quite specific, and there's probably been 4 or 5 games about evolving, and they've done it.
Yeah.
Let's cover the bullets thing. Yeah, that's a fun idea, and it might be possible. Again, the version you just said about the factory line is probably over scope for what we could do, but we might be able to play in that narrative space.
Yeah. Yeah, as a story for Sabotage, I think that one's cool.
Yeah.
You Are the Power Source is just way too specific. Everyone will make the same game.
Yeah.
You just power machines when you go near them. Tower Offense. The reason we've upvoted Tower Offense mainly is because there's an LD idea that we have that we really like and wouldn't mind making.
There's a game we've had in the docket for if this one gets voted, we'll make this game, and I think we've had it for the last 20 oldies.
Yeah,
I mean, definitely the last 3 we've done.
I think it may be an idea that we literally came up with for the first LD we ever participated in. It was a theme that didn't win, so we didn't make it, and it's been in the back of our minds ever since. We think it's cool. It's a good scope for LD. It fits 4 or 5 of the themes in these lists, so we've upvoted all of them. But the idea is that you are climbing a tower in a platforming type game, a very vertical tower.
Mm-hmm.
But there are 2 versions of that tower side by side. So you can see your real character, let's say on the left-hand side, climbing up through the tower. There's platforms, there's enemies. but sometimes there are very difficult sections, maybe even impossible sections, a jump that is just too high to make or something like that. But you'll also notice over on the right-hand side of the screen in tower number 2 is like a ghost shadow version of yourself who is following the exact same movements as your first character, but who's in a different version of the tower with different platforms and different enemies. And at any time, you can switch your control to the other character. So if you reach an impossible section on tower 1, you can just flip the character who matters, the character who exists in the world, to the one on the right-hand side.
And I think that there's like a natural skill curve that comes out of that
Definitely.
When you start, you're focused on your character, so you'll do the hard fights, but then you'll get past them and swap when it becomes an impossible jump.
Right.
Whereas as you get better, you'll just flip to the other character the second the challenge comes up, and you'll just... And also, the other reason I really like this idea is because I think me and you have almost an identical picture of it in our heads.
Almost
even
certainly,
after this.
yeah.
Like, it's just... I feel like we're thinking of almost the exact same game.
But this works for... If we look down this list, control 2 things at once. It works for multiple perspectives. On the right-hand side, it works for reflection. So it's nice that if any of those themes win, we can make this tower game. It will be weird to me for this game to if this gets made, because it's been just a lingering idea in our heads for years.
It should have been made 5 years ago. It'll feel like we're just like ghosts ticking off our like bucket list, so we can like this now. So, it's probably send us papers, please. Yeah, Aperture. One of the things that a lot of the time we end up defaulting to a kind of wouldn't it be interesting to do a papers, please, but style thing, a kind of reading and assessing at speed, kind of Catania, I guess, right? Like it's one of the benefits you get out of that, like having to look over details, bearing in mind a series of rules and applying them. So yeah, it's definitely. I think a one shot. What do you think you want was? I don't know that game.
One Shot is a tiny, I think it may even be RPG Maker game, and almost entirely a narrative game. The game has, I think, a total of about 5 puzzles in it, most of which are very straightforward puzzles. It's just a game where the light has gone out in a world, and you're just this little character, I think he's like 7 years old, and he just wakes up in this world one day, and he has this giant light bulb with him. And you walk around, and that's the sun, and everyone's going, "What, dude? You must be the chosen one. You've got the sun." And you've just got to make your way to the tower in the middle of their collapsing, dying world, and replace the sun.
You were correct.
But it's
10 out of 10 on Steam, 98% on Google users, 80% on Metacritic. It's pretty impressive.
It's weird because when you play it, it doesn't feel like a game that should have the universal praise that it has. Which isn't. I'm not making a comment on how good I think the game is. It's just a game that it doesn't have. It's a little bit clunky to play. Like the movement's quite slow.
I've never heard of this.
There's a lot of like just backtracking and walking slowly around areas that can sometimes be a bit tricky to navigate. So you end up doubling back on yourself quite a lot.
It's weird because it feels like it might be from that cave story era where
it's got.
But it's not. It's 2016. It's not old enough to be the first of its kind. Like at least Cave Story 2004.
It totally has that feel to it though. It's got that To the Moon quality where it's just a story that really seems to resonate with people.
Okay, cool.
I thought I've not actually finished it. I'm very close to the end of it, and I've been enjoying it. I don't think I would give it the incredible praise that you see a lot of people give it, but it's been good. What was that, sorry?
Do you have it on Steam?
Someone else has it on Steam that I've been playing.
Curse you.
Sorry, bud.
You need to play more games on Steam. Now you've got too many shared libraries now. You are my main shared library. You've got so many games on Steam.
Yeah, I've got like 450 or something daft now.
You're like a small, like I was like a kind of I'll buy a 30 quid game like once every few months. You were like I'll hoard 50 indies once every few months. It's like your library is astonishingly larger than mine.
And the thing is, I've probably spent less money on my library than yours as well because I don't buy games ever. I think all of my games come from spending 1 penny on Humble Bundles and stuff.
Yeah, that's true. I always forget to Humble Bundle. Cool, let's keep moving then.
There was one thing I was going to say about One Shot. I'm trying to remember what it actually was. There's a really interesting conflict that, as far as I've been, isn't explored that much, and I'm hoping it gets explored more towards the end. But it's got that Dark Souls kind of quality to it where actually replacing the sun, some people feel, is kind of like hopeless, like it's a delay of the inevitable. So while most people are going like, you're the chosen one, get our sun back and power the world again, and occasionally you'll just come across a character who's like, what's the point? It'll just die again.
Right. Okay.
And so it's like, do you continue the Age of Dark or the Age of Light? And I suspect the choice at the end of the game will be, do you replace the sun or not?
Okay. Well, it did come out 5 years after Dark Souls.
But yeah, it is a good game.
Well, maybe a new game for me to have not heard of. Anyway, yeah, sure.
Mythology we like for the same sort of
Yeah,
reasons
there's
as 1 minute to
such
prepare, I
an
guess.
interesting point. Look, mythology is actually one of my favourite like themes to go for here, where they're basically like, there's like, here's a list of like 400 stories to pick from.
Yeah.
Can you make a game? Because it's almost like, here's like a little batch of themes that you're allowed to pick from.
Yeah.
And they are all kind of specific, but you are allowed to pick whichever one you like.
And it'll be fun to play through the LD suggest. I think this will be one of my favorite themes to play the other people's games for, because it'll be interesting to see which are the common stories that people go for, which are the weird like mythological stories that really do exist but you've just never heard of, but someone's based their game on it. Like,
yeah, because we'll see a lot of I'm sure we'll see a lot of Greek mythology. I'm sure we'll see a lot of Norse mythology, but you'll also probably see some like Shinto or Afrikaans mythology that you're just like not expecting. And like and even then like when you talk about like Greek mythology or like you'll see a lot of maybe like Theseus and the Minotaur or like the gods and the Titans, but there's weird stories in there and there's small stories in there. Like, even within the Trials of Hercules, there's 12 of those. You got a lot of options. I like mythology.
Me too. And one thing that I recognise, I think this would make the theme objectively worse, but just me personally, I think it would be interesting, is if the theme was a mythology from your country. Because I would just find it very interesting to see people, because people from all over the world take part in LD, to actually get that breadth of culture to like see if you're from Lithuania and you're taking part in LD. I don't know a damn thing about the mythology.
It's so you're right. But I agree. It is probably literally worse, but it would be more interesting for us to play in the end.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about mythology, and like you were saying like, what about all the saint stories? Like you were talking about like St. George and stuff. Like there's mythology local to like every nation.
Right.
Like I don't even think about England when I think of mythology, but there's.
But
tons.
we do have mythology. Yeah. I don't think of it really either, but we totally have it.
Yeah. No, it is interesting, and I think it'll be really fun if mythology does get voted up to just like look at a bunch of myths and just like read a couple stories. It'll be almost like, okay, what can we, is there one that really speaks to us here? It's like if they did, I said the same if like they'd done like fables or like like Grimm's fairy tales or whatever. Just like, okay, let's pick one. Like let's roll with it. It's fun because it gives you a bank of available stuff to be creative with.
Right. Fragmentation.
You pitched an idea for this that I liked, which is I think the reason that this one went through, which was about being made of like a series of cubes and splitting yourself into various shapes, essentially reassembling, fragmenting, reassembling.
So I was imagining like a 3x3 square, and you can break off almost like Tetramino shaped pieces from yourself, and re-stick them, reattach them to yourself somewhere else in order to navigate corridors of weird shapes and widths and sizes and stuff. Basically an extended game of hole in the wall for anyone who knows that, which you almost certainly don't.
It's Japanese and British, right?
Is it Japanese as well? Fair enough, maybe, yeah.
It was originally one of those like Batsuit shows, yeah.
Fair enough. More people may be aware of it then. I'm sure it's something that's been memed before.
Like that era of Japanese television, late 90s Japanese television. I mean, I haven't really kept up, but late 90s Japanese like game show television is probably the best thing that's ever happened on to me.
Gotta love a bit of Takeshi's Castle.
Yeah, and just like Gaki no Tsukai, like the Don't Laugh shows. Brilliant graphics. Or the one where the guy just has to walk around and just get hit with cream pies in the face for like 2 hours. Seminal television.
What's the one where the guy has to pretend that his friends are invisible for a full day? And they can just do whatever they want.
The one where they're eating things in the room to work out his chocolate order.
Yeah.
Although they have the elastic bands around their nose and they have to try and eat a marshmallow. This is television gold. And Takeshi's Castle. I mean, they're such good shows, aren't they?
We need to make a Takeshi's Castle game. Which theme would that be good for?
Well, it's kind of what I'm doing for my real job right now, so I don't want to do it. But yeah, also, did you ever play Mushroom 11?
I think I've seen Mushroom 11.
It's a good game, but that's kind of fragmentation. You can split into small bits.
Okay.
Reform into big bits.
Okay.
That's interesting.
Where are we up to? Turn a job into a game.
Just feels like it's got a lot of breadth. Again,
it's
kind of like
mythology
having that
thing
bank
going
of
for
myths. You've got a bank of jobs.
Yeah. Did we have a particular idea that we liked?
Taxi/delivery game with different mechanics. Well, actually, we were talking about So we've been working on a game. I don't know if you've told the stream this, but me and you have been working on a game together.
Which one?
Tic-Tac-Toe.
Yeah, people. Oh wait, do people know? I think some people know about this.
Okay. Well, we've been working on a little game together, and one of the main control method for that is effectively like pool/Sabutio, where you're like flicking stuff in directions. And we were talking about applying that to various, like applying a movement mechanic to different job settings, whether that be one job setting or loads of different ones in a kind of WarioWare-ish style. So I think that was our plan for that one.
I also just realised that one of our pitches for outdated technology works for this as well. Well, not really a pitch, but a setting that we maybe quite like. Which is that you are the person who goes around lighting street lamps at night.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is just a cute idea for a game.
Or just like the idea that Sabutio is outdated technology. Is Sabutio a thing? Like you're talking about, I'm not sure anyone will know a hole in the wall. Who the fuck's going to know Sabutio?
No one's going to know Sabutio.
Even I was kind of surprised that I knew what that was when you said it. I was like, oh my god, yeah, I forgot that.
I think that's a very English thing.
It's not just an English thing, it's a very English, like, early to mid-90s thing.
Yeah.
For, like, boys. And, like, in like, the rural north where there wasn't anything fun. Like, I feel like it's so specific.
Sabutio is tabletop football, and you play by flicking your football players into the, soccer ball. And you take it in turns to flick a player into the ball. It's fun, I like Sabutio.
Yeah, I never played it, but it always looks fun. So that was a potential for that. But also, like, even if we came up with a brand new idea, I think turning a job into a game is one of those themes that's good, kind of like mythology, where you're giving someone a bank of lots of potential ideas.
Yeah.
But you're giving me a limit. Like, okay, well, I have to make a game about something like this. Not foosball, no, it's weird.
It's not foosball. Your players are not attached to anything. You just have freestanding but base
it's more
weighted
like,
pieces.
More like Tiddlywinks.
Which is much more universal and all the Americans will know.
I think Tiddlywinks is better known than...
Okay, that also feels like...
You know when Americans make up like British-sounding words? Tiddlywinks is probably...
one, yeah. So yeah, they're not on rods. You just have little pieces, kind of like how you'd have pieces in a tabletop.
They're on like a weeble. They're on like a curved base, so they always self-right.
They're kind of like Mexican jumping bean type things, where they self-right.
So am I right in thinking Mexican jumping beans are actually insects in a bean?
I have no idea what Mexican jumping bean is.
I feel like that's something I've heard.
Isn't because Mexican jumping beans? There's also like a toy based on them, right?
Hang on, am I right?
Because I'm not thinking of the beans themselves. I'm thinking of a toy that's based on them. That maybe it's just a toy that I had, and it's also not a universal thing. Fucking hell, toys that are base weighted so they're all self-weight is what we're talking about.
Is weebles. So Mexican jumping beans, I was right. They're seed pods that are inhabited by the larva of a small moth.
Huh.
That's why they jump. Oh, hang on. Do they jump because of that? Presumably, right? In the spring, the moth was something like that.
Magic beans, maybe that's what I'm talking about. So they're weighted at the bottom, so they always self-correct, and you can flick them, and you flick them at the ball, and then they wobble and self-right again.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why they jump. It doesn't actually say anywhere on the Wikipedia page here why they jump. I've got to assume it's that. The beans become energetic when a person holds them in their hand for a few minutes. What do you explain? Why? Please say that it's the moth. You're acting like you're saying there's moths in there, yeah. But then all the movement, you're talking about the bean. Anyway, whatever. Cool. Let's move on.
Replication.
Can't remember why we thought that one was good. Oh, it was well, actually, similarly the Kintsugi thing, but it wasn't about duplication. It's about recreation.
You're right there.
I've had a lot of gin and tonic. There's a lot of tonic in the system. It's just this stuff's good.
Replication, at a glance, it implies making lots and lots of copies of something, but to replicate can also just be to make a copy of something that already exists. So instead of you making lots of versions of a thing, replication could be that you have something and you've got to try and recreate it as closely as you can. So that could be an interesting take on replication. To maybe have to like in a papers pleasey kind of sense, make a forged document that looks as identical to the original as possible, or a piece of art where you're trying to make the art look as close as
that was one of the ideas we had, right? It was about being an art critic who's looking at art and trying to work out whether or not it's
a fake.
Yeah, there's a word for that, right? It isn't replicate though. What is it? It's a
fake.
This is. Is it a duplicate? Is that what they call it?
A
replica? I guess it's just a forgery. Yeah, well, sure, probably.
No, I know what you mean. There's a word for it.
There is another word, right? I'm not going crazy.
Oh, jeez. It's a fake.
It's a bad, different, new, wrong. Cool. Anyway,
the next two is the tail game that we mentioned. Outdated technology. Again, it's just got that same appeal as mythology and turn the job into a game where there's just so many things you could pick. It's a nice set of ideas.
Plagiarism. Yeah, not quite. It's not what I was looking for, but it's also fine. Outdated. I can't remember if we actually ended up having a game idea for that. We might have. We might find it again in our brains.
You mentioned a rotary phone.
Yeah, but that's not. I don't have an idea about it.
I think that's a great game. Rotary phone game.
Rotary phone game. You play as a rotary phone. You are the rotary phone.
You are the rotary phone. Time is only finite when rotary phones.
Malfunction. Did we have one for that, or did we just like that? We just felt there was enough stepping off points from it.
Malfunction. Yes, it's Wild Mage.
Yes. Okay, so you're one of the things, and again, it's very easy to overscope this, so we'd have to really work this one out. We'd have to make this mechanically very simple to begin with, so that we could fuck with it very quickly. But so there's a Dungeons and Dragons class. I have to assume it's a regular Dungeons and Dragons thing, but it appears in Baldur's Gate, Shadows of Arm 2, the expansion.
I think it's also a Dungeons and Dragons expansion. I don't think it's vanilla D&D.
It's not vanilla Baldur's Gate 2, and I think vanilla Baldur's Gate 2 is vanilla D&D. Right. So I have to assume it's
I think they're both expansions, yeah.
Yeah. So, but the Wild Mage is basically a mage that has a special spell that basically rolls on a table of 100 random things, and also every spell has a chance to accidentally trigger up to 100 random things, or one of 100 random things, some of which are positive, some of which are negative. So it's the idea about dealing with wild consequences to your own actions that are maybe not always intentional, and having a lot of it's me, like, I think everyone probably likes this, but me and Sky often talk about like WarioWare and these ideas of like these tiny things that are very interesting because they're new and you've not seen them before and you have to react quite quickly. I think it's a similar kind of passion, right? Of just like the Wild Mage idea is that something might happen that you've never seen before, and it might not be like mechanically brilliant, but it's new, it's interesting, and for a couple of seconds it's going to have your attention, and that's going to happen a lot.
You're having to constantly kind of almost problem solve for this new weird wacky thing that just happened. You're having to adapt to what's going on. So in terms of calling it a malfunction, I guess we had the idea of maybe you have some sort of weapon, like a broken weapon, and it can malfunction in various ways. And you just have to
all the kids get their wands, and yours is you get the broken one.
Yeah.
From the PE whatever it's called, the used kit. What do they call that? The bin. What's it called? There's a name for that.
It's usually just lost and found stuff, isn't it?
The lost property bin or whatever.
Property, yeah.
Yeah, and you get the lost property wand, which like some like student from 6 years ago snapped while doing a gnarly flip. and yeah, you have to use a slightly broken wand in order to go and save the world. Whatever. So yeah, that's
ruins.
So we went back and voted up ruins because of the idea we had for an abandoned world, which is easily my favourite idea we've had.
Do you want to take the reins on that?
Yeah, sure. Well, okay, so this was... to be fair, there's a lot of ideas. Let's skip ahead to it. Let's come back to it. Let's do connections, reflection, planets. Well, reflection is the tower. Connections could also be the tower. Right? That's fair.
Sorry, accidentally muted. For connections was also the power line idea.
Yes. Yeah. The idea of like taking a power line between places and using it as a thing to wrap around stuff, which I think is a really fun idea.
So yeah, I imagine you'd have a power line behind your character, trailing all the way from the start point, and enemies can try and like snap that.
Yeah, and as you go, you can wrap it around various like poles or nodes to sort of safe it there, like it gets wrapped in.
They'll almost work like a checkpoint, so you can actually like reach up and tie your little wire to the top of a telegraph pole, so that it's now hanging in the air, and you can travel underneath it, and not get it tangled with your current wire. And then
wrapping up enemies by like circling them with like a lasso almost, and they can like they can maybe, if they hit the wire, they damage you as well. But if you can like stop them briefly, then you can quickly do a circle around them and get them wrapped up and defeated. Maybe a little higher scope than some of the other ideas we've had in the way that I'm picturing it right now, but not necessarily too high a scope. Just perhaps relies on more game design principles from an engine that you'd be less familiar with, for example. But that's certainly something. I think also planets was just an idea that was good enough that we figured we'd be able to come up with something for it.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of scope, but it's interesting to do something that works, on various planets all at the same time.
Yeah, and we like space, in a really way.
And an abandoned world is really the same thing. I think whatever game we came up with planets, would probably go for an abandoned world. Either that or
or this brilliant idea. So one of the things, abandoned world is my hungry. What's that? I've scrolled up too far.
Abandoned world is what, sorry?
Okay, so I just read a comment and I was confused. So abandoned world. So one of the things that Sky brought up was the idea that rather than being like a world like a planet, it's a world like a game world. And there's a lot of routes we went off in this about the idea of, for example, a game that is no longer functional, or like an online game that was no longer running. So we started talking about this, about like an MMO that no longer has a player base. And we were talking about maybe being in an MMO world on the last day it existed. And then we were talking about, well, what about not MMOs? If we want to scope down in terms of like our own discussion here, what can we do that would be similarly interesting? And we're talking about, well, what about a video game that had a save file in it, but the person that was playing the save file is gone, and you're taking over their world that has now been abandoned because they've not been there for a while. And we started talking about these ideas of potentially some kind of mystery where you're playing as like a detective, or maybe like some kid's dad or something, who is trying to find out what's happened to a missing child, and going into their game to see if you can find clues of what they've done, a game in which they could have kept like a diary or left messages or left clues, and having to piece together a real world mystery from a world that's been abandoned by them. It's just such a good idea. I think this is such a good idea. Like when I got really into this, like even after like we hung up and like some of these ideas, I'm like, yeah, I can't wait. Let's make an Oldie game, like tower game. Like it's brilliant. Mechanically, it's going to be good. But this one, I'm just like, man, we've got to make this regardless. Like it's really interesting. The idea of like making a game set inside of a small game, that's not inherently brilliant. Like people have done games set inside games, whatever. It's an excuse to make something very minimal, but an excuse to make something very minimal and poignant. But the idea of doing something like this, where you're trying to solve a real world mystery through a game, and you were saying like things like this have that kind of creepypasta feel of like a Ben drowned.
Yes.
Like picking up someone else's save file is quite. It's got an odd vibe to it.
It really does.
Like me characters walking in and someone being like, "Hey, we haven't seen you in weeks. Like you're behind on your tax payments or whatever." And also, I think there can be moments of poignancy with characters who, in the game, someone had developed a relationship with, even if it's just a really cutesy voice, like ripping off Animal Crossing, and it's just like, you're my favorite villager or whatever. Just like little things like that, you can just like really lean hard into the feels on, of just having moments where someone's relationship with these fictional characters mirroring their relationship in real life. I don't know, it's a fucking brilliant idea.
Yeah, you sometimes hear the story go around online of occasionally there are kids who, I don't know whether it's just an anxiety issue or something like that, but they don't talk to anyone. Occasionally it's something you'll hear online of like, we bought our kid a dog, and our kid has has barely said a word in 8 years to anyone, and as soon as we got them their pet, they like really started opening up to us or whatever. And as just a story idea, the reason you might need to go into the game file of the kid who's gone missing, like maybe you are, like you said, you're a dad, your kid goes missing, he's kidnapped, And it's like we've got almost nothing to go on because he never really spoke to us out loud. The one thing he did talk to was his game. He would write notes into it or talk into the microphone on his little handheld console. Maybe there's clues in there. And because it is some kind of like Animal Crossing or Sims knockoff, because it's an abandoned world, like it's the world that he's made, he might have left things in the game that do represent stuff from his real life. So he's been building buildings that represent his street.
Yeah, I was saying you could turn this into something like adjacent to like a murder mystery. You could also go, like in my head, I was thinking today, like you could go down that route of just like coping with loss. Yeah. Like someone died, and you're just like dealing with like you're like seeing the things that they left behind, like things like that. There's a lot of very real stories you can tell with this. Beginner's Guide, exactly. Yeah, Beginner's Guide was one of the things that I brought up as well, as that starts in that CSS map, right? And like examining someone through their work is interesting, but examining someone, I think particularly if it's not just what they've made, but it's like the kind of relationships they've built with other characters too, is really interesting. Or you can just build a mystery out of the things that they've done in this space and try and solve a problem, as opposed to just learn about someone. But yeah, Beginner's Guide is a good example of something like that. It's brilliant.
Yeah, one thing I've been talking to you recently about is I think almost like a self-realization about game ideas that I like, and game ideas that I very frequently pitch to you. I think a lot of them fall under this category of having a degree of abstraction from the setting of the game. You are one level removed from where the game takes place, which is part of the appeal for, well, I guess most people in chat are familiar with Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. One of the really cool things about being an expert is that entirely from the viewpoint of just seeing pen and paper, you can defuse a bomb. Real, but you know, like an actual existing puzzle bomb. You can get that done just by looking at a notebook and just having a pen and talking to someone. It's cool that you can like almost vicariously do the defusal, and it makes you feel really like professional and cool that you can affect that and you can get that thing done without even interacting with it. Having this degree of separation and crossing that bridge via just communication and your own external tools. It's really cool, and I think this game has some of that flavor as well. Because when you go into a game, obviously you're entering a world of someone else's creation. And I think what's really cool about going into someone's save file is you're not only going into someone else's creation, you're going into an entirely separate person's interaction with and kind of journey up until this point within a third person's creation. So you're like one level removed from the game itself as it's intended by the developer. I think that's just really cool to go into a game, not just see the world that the developer made, but then see how someone that you don't even know, you've never met before, you've never spoken to, has since interacted with that world.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting story. And if we can come up with like an interesting story, or a couple of punchy emotional moments, I will spend the next few weeks trying to convince you that we should just make this anyway. Great. I think there's a really interesting idea to be had here, and it's just the bones of an idea right now. Like we haven't worked out the game, we haven't worked out the mechanics. One of the things I was saying to you, also the amount more I wanted to speak about this idea than the rest says a lot. But the idea of like having to do things, mechanical things within the game in order to unlock story moments, like someone being like, well, you've you get X many passes to the various houses, or X many keys in a given day, or we've closed our doors. Like you can't, no one lets you in the house until you've given them 10 fish. That's how it is every day. And you're like, fuck's sake, like, did you do this every day? I haven't got 10 fish. You gotta go and find 10 fish. Or like, there's an event, if it's like an Animal Crossing style thing. It's like the post office is closed because it's the postman's gone missing event. I got to solve that to get to the post office. Like you probably used the post office over the last 3 years of playing this game. I think there's a lot of interesting space to explore there. I'm also, me and you have never done together like a meaningful narrative game. We lean on mechanics a lot of the time, and also like polish before. We've just leaned on having something that felt like a good game to prove that we could like create something that felt impressive.
Hyperdemocracy is definitely the only LD game of the 4 we've done so far where
exactly, and I was
narrative came first. Yeah, and you can include in that as well basically every other LD theme we've pitched. 95% of those are much more mechanically driven than narrative driven.
And I still think there's probably a reason. I think me and you do run towards that for a reason. Like, it's the reason that we like this form, and we're not entering the 48-hour film festival right now. Although I'd love to do that with you at some point as well.
Yeah,
just like but like, there's a reason we're doing this, because we lean towards mechanics, and we like the form in which games differ. And also in 72 hours, it's not about creating a meaningful whatever. Sometimes it's about like exploring an idea a little bit and being like, look what we could do here, and that's cool. But I think this leans towards that in an interesting way. It's like, look how with simplistic graphics and simplistic, like, we've managed to use the LD limitations to still make something punchy.
So I think that's pretty much everything that I wanted to hit. Have you got any final words before we close up on the stream?
No, other than we will be writing a list of games. Some of them you'll have heard, some of them you won't have, when the final 20 drop. In terms of how the stream will be set up, I will probably be on art and sound, and Sky will probably be on programming. There'll be some crossover probably, especially if we there'll definitely be some but also if we try and make a game for which the art load isn't super heavy, I won't feel too bad about doing that. So maybe we'll plan around that.
Yeah.
But there'll be actually, one of the things that happened, and you mentioned this as well, and I think we maybe do this again, is that because with Buried Things, I initially didn't think I was going to be free for much of it. Right. I thought it was going to be more like a Hyper Democracy, where I just kind of jumped in for a day, and then being that was I had the whole weekend free, and pretty much after I missed like 5 hours or something, and then we did the whole thing together. But because you set up the idea, you basically acted as project lead for the whole thing, and having someone calling the shots, and I think it's having the programmer call the shots, honestly, because they're basically the people that can most realistically creep the scope and roll back the scope. Like, the artist doesn't creep the fucking scope. I think having that happen is probably helpful, and I might suggest we do something like that this time as well. Maybe if we're both programming a little bit, we can share that load. But if I would suggest not only that we have a project lead, I would suggest that you probably take on project lead again, and that you can call the shots a bit more. And again, it wasn't like we were getting task lists out, but it was just a kind of fluidity of, I was like, what do we need now? You tell me. Especially because I'm providing assets, it's just an easier workflow. So that's it, really.
It is. I guess from your end, it is more like just injecting bits and pieces as you go into the.
It's more like going to work, honestly,
of the project.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not there saying, hey, we just cracked this thing, we can now afford to do this. And also, you are doing the kind of thing where if I throw a design idea out, you are in a better position to say that isn't going to land. Like, I think I pitched both the cutscene and the splash, and in both those instances, you're like, yeah, we can fit those in. There is going to be time. And I think like things like the final splash, you were like, don't work on that. It isn't going in. Because you had a better sense of the scope at that point, and it worked very well. We literally stopped. We didn't finish with like 10 seconds to spare because really we were an hour behind. We finished with like 30 minutes to spare because we were on time.
It was good actually. It timed out beautifully, to be honest. I remember saying at the 2 hour mark, 2 hour from completion, saying like, there's nothing that I feel like needs to go into the game at this point. It's just going to be choosing bits and pieces.
I think that's when we got the splash. It was like, do you think we can within 2 hours get something? It's like, what's the smallest thing we can get? It's like, okay, I'll try to splash. Do you want to write one more bit of music for the beginning? Like, do you want to do the credits page? And
just like bits of polish that had been mentioned along the way that were always a case of, maybe I'll get back to that. Probably not, but maybe. Like shadows, which never ended up.
Yeah, like the cloud shadows you put in the last like hour. I'm pretty sure a game made by Skyward and Mirren was put in the last 20 minutes. Like. But it was all in, and it was in like comfortably. At no point, I wasn't more stressed at the end. I was more jazzed at the end, but I wasn't more stressed.
So I guess just to finish up, a bit of like housekeeping, the actual plan here. We're going to stream again on, LD begins for UK 2 a.m. Saturday morning, or 6 p.m. West Coast USA on Friday, 9 p.m. East Coast USA on Friday. That is the point where we find out the theme. We are going to stream probably ahead of that by possibly like 2 hours, I would imagine.
That'll be a brief stream there, right? That'll be getting the themes, laying. It won't be like a 12-hour stream.
Right. Yeah. The idea probably there is that we will give final details about 20 or fewer ideas for each of the possible themes that could come up. Then on the countdown finish, we will find out the theme. We may spend an hour or so working on it just to begin with, but at that point we'll actually probably just go to bed for a fresh start on Saturday morning for us. And at that point there'll probably just be like a 15-hour stream after that, straight through until I go to bed on Saturday night. And then and all the way through Sunday, Monday, that full 72 hours. So Rex, I think, is streaming on the Friday. He's just going to go earlier than usual. There will not be Saturday, Sunday streams as they usually are. That is all just going to be LD straight through. Are we doing a Thursday stream? I guess not. I guess it's just Friday's the next thing we need to do now.
I don't think there's going to be any point until we get the final thing.
Yeah. No,
everyone's seen our voting for the 3 breakdowns. So
yeah, the next LD you'll hear about now will be Friday. And I hope to see you guys there and for some of the development as well, because we will keep an eye on chat, obviously, while we're developing stuff. If anyone has any cool ideas, we might steal them. So
yeah, and also it might end up being the case that we need a little bit of help, like we did last time. We took some of the artwork. Yeah. Who knows where we're going to land this time, but it might well be.
Maybe we could do like achievements or something and just get
achievement
icons from chat.
We'll find some way to incorporate them. Yeah. It was so fun last time. And also, like, it's so motivating. Please come and support us. We get so sleepy.
Yeah, it is nice to be what's the word I'm looking for? Accountable to someone because there are people watching. That's good.
Yep.
So come watch. But yeah, I think that's all from us tonight. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you on, depending on your time zone, we'll see you Friday, Saturday, to find out the final theme. We're very excited. I'm so.
I do love a good game jam. Yes, I do.
Oh, me too.
I love a good game jam.
Especially after the last one, I'm stoked for this. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm totally aware that we're gonna not live up to the last one, but
no, we will, mate. We're gonna smash it. We're gonna do even better.
I've got logic now. At least I can write slightly better.
Oh yeah, get some sick music going. No, we're gonna get number 1 this time, mate. Don't you worry.
Oh, cool.
Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll see you over the weekend. Bye bye.
See you later.